a special edition of the Celtic Way morning briefing with Celtic Greatest 11 revisited, but I'll let Sean tell you all the details of that. First and foremost, as you can see, we've got a very special guest today, and I can only describe our special guest as a Scottish media legend. I was checking your LinkedIn bio, Mr. Kevin McKenna, and it said that you've worked continuously in newspapers for 35 years or over 35 years. You've got a lot to say about things, mostly politics and Celtic. But I like this line, Sean. He's a specialist in making other people's words dance if they haven't the time to do it themselves. Now, Kevin's credits are awesome. He's a former assistant editor, deputy editor, executive editor of Scotland on Sunday, The Scotsman, the Sunday Herald, and the Scottish Daily Mail. He's now a columnist. Her Majesty's Scottish Daily Mail. Get that in, Kevin. Her Majesty, indeed. And he's now a columnist and feature writer for The Observer, The Herald, The National, and of course The Celtic Way. And we've all been entertained by his musings on the Celtic Way because he's a most wonderful writer. And he's also a contributor to BBC Scotland radio and TV programmes, as well as STV. There's nothing this man hasn't done in terms of Scottish media. So, Sean, give it a bit of that, for the one and only Kevin McKenna. Kevin McKenna, how you doing?
Aye, very good. I don't really recognise much of that. I think I must have paid somebody else to write that.
Wonderful to have you. Now, as we always do, first things first on the pod, we plug our sponsors, football prizes, and for $3.95, Sean, that's a prize and a half, isn't it? You can get a signed Celtic home shirt, signed by the full squad. You enter into the draw on football prizes. The link's in the description. But also get your comments and questions coming in, and we will enter someone into that draw for free with the comment of the day. That's usually what we do, isn't that right, Sean?
Certainly is. It's actually £3.16 the day they're running a wee
special. They're running a raw sort of.
So it's even cheaper, full squad signed jersey. But first comment after your big introduction to Kevin, Robert Gibson. Aye, but can he get us a win in Europe?
We'll be working on that, no doubt. And along the start line across the bottom, guys, you know the deal. Subscribe to the Celtic Way, supporting top quality journalism, covering the club you love. £1 for 2 months of full access. You get access to everything, especially the pods and everything on the website. And you'll see the wonderful writings, as I've said, of Kevin, some other writings of myself and Sean. Maybe we'll say they're wonderful too, Sean. Yeah, we'll big them up as wonderful. Indeed.
I mean, I'm privileged to be in such company, boys.
The three amigos, we're going to argue over who's who at the end of the programme, so stick around for that. Now I'm going to hand you over to Sean Martin, to explain the premise of today's programme. Take it away, Sean.
Cheers, Tony. Not a big intro for me, no. Not a big intro.
I see you every day.
Same old. They know I talk nonsense anyway. So it's 20 years to the day, guys, since Celtic held an event to announce and celebrate the club's greatest ever 11 and a few other awards on the same day. So I thought we'd invite Kevin on, and the three of us would just have a wee chat with you all. And as always, happy to throw up comments throughout it as well. So first of all, I suppose we should mention the team. I suppose that's the way to start, isn't it, Kevin? And Tony there. There's the team there. So in a quite odd 3-3-4 formation, you've got Ronnie Simpson in goal, back three, Danny McGrain, Billy McNeil, Tommy Gemmell, midfield, Betty Auld, Bobby Murdoch, Paul McStay, and then up front, Bobby Lennox, Kenny Dalglish, Henrik Larsson, and of course, Jimmy Johnston. So rather than kind of reselect it, because we felt that would be quite disrespectful, what we're going to do is I'm going to throw a question to you first and foremost, which isn't who should be in over any of these guys, but are there any players that you felt at the time, because remember this was 2002, are there any players you felt at the time had a case to be included or considered but weren't chosen at the time? So someone who'd played for Celtic already at that point in 2002. There's a few, I would say, obvious ones that you could throw up, but we'll go to you first, Kevin, since you're the special guest.
And also, I'm the oldest, so I can maybe remember a couple of previous generations. I mean, you can't argue with the inclusion of any of them, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could have maybe you could adequately form something like 2, maybe 3 11s and not argue with them. And of course, I mean, there's 6 Lisbon Lions in there. But I think, you know, the earliest of these is, I mean, this is like an all-time best 11 between 1967 and 2002, which is fine. But you know, I know very little footage exists of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, 50s. But you've got extensive newspaper cuttings, books. I mean, I remember writing a piece years ago, I think, for the Observer on whether Celtic were the most written about club in Europe, because at that time it was going into 3 figures, the number of books that had been written about Celtic or issues to do with Celtic, and since then there've probably been a few dozen more. So you would have the likes of, you know, the likes of Bobby Evans in the 50s, for a while Celtic's most capped player, and you know, renowned throughout the UK as being one of the top defenders of his generation. You've got people like, I mean, Jimmy McGrory, record goal scorer. I mean, I think Jimmy and McGrory, I think, scored in 4 different Scottish Cup finals. And given that his record will never be broken, you know, you think, well, you know, he's bound to be in or around there. And then you get people that, I mean, a lot of Celtic fans might not know this name, but this guy was world class, Sandy McMahon, who again, you know, scored a hat trick, I think, in Celtic's first ever Scottish Cup win. And you've got, again, 1967 is not a bad starting point, because between the Second World War and 1965, Celtic only won 4 trophies, 1 league title between 47 and 65. But you know, there were some amazing players of that generation. The problem being that the custodians of the club at that time, as soon as any Celtic player showed any promise, they were getting punted. You know, their feet weren't touching the ground. So you've got like the 7-1 team, people like Bobby Collins. I mean, Evans, I think, went to Chelsea. Bobby Collins became a footballer of the year in England in 1965. The likes of Bertie Peacock. So there were a lot of good players in that barren period, but for various reasons, we hardly collected a trophy. So you've got people like that. I suppose also in the 1970s. If we're talking about right up to 2002, I will always have a deep affection for Chris Sutton. You know, Chris Sutton is the equal of a lot of those players in that 11. He gave us a lot of joy. He was associated with a very successful period in our history. You know, we loved his attitude. He scored loads of goals, again, important goals in Europe. Who can forget the 2001 game against Juventus? Loads of goals against our oldest rivals, Rangers. And he could slot in at centre half whenever there was a personnel crisis, as I remember him doing in a very, very tough encounter with Rangers at Ibrox around about that time. So, yeah, you can't argue with any of those players, but you know, you could have another 11 and not argue with any of them either.
Sean Curran here saying we need to have a starting 20.
I'll go with Sean.
Plenty of comments coming in.
Alex Gully was the other name.
There's plenty of names. Retro Celtic, what a team. Lennox was so underrated. A couple of ones saying that. Robert Gibson.
I just wanted to say,
Kaiser saying, sorry, Tony, the most spoke about club on the planet, as Kevin was saying. But right, Tony, what you saying?
I just wanted to say, I bet you thought you knew your history till you spoke to Kevin there.
Well, to be fair, there was still a few names you never mentioned there. I thought you would have mentioned more. I thought I mentioned maybe Patsy Gallagher, maybe. Well, you said Charlie Tully there, Tony. You could even go back Jimmy Quinn, Dan Doyle, Alec McNair, or
Jimmy Quinn. Very good, Sean.
See, bro, I don't know. I don't like. There's a question here. Well, there's more than a few questions. Jimmy McGrory all day long. Kevin Ferrier. What about Tully?
Yeah,
we'll come to players, Tony, that maybe played after 2002. If you think there's any that would merit not necessarily an inclusion, but to be in the discussion. But there's a question here for the two of you in particular. Where is it? Beach Boys, was Dalglish at his very best at Celtic, or did he not hit greater heights at Liverpool? Would you make of that question, Tony?
You can't hold a candle to Ken Dalglish as a player for Celtic or Liverpool. As Kevin said there, the minute a Celtic player showed promise, custodians were punting him. So he went for a then record fee. He was becoming the finished article, and then he joined a wonderful Liverpool team who thought they could never replace Keegan and got almost probably 10 times a player than Dalglish, in my own personal opinion. When Dalglish left Celtic, it's the first time I remember a wee brittle heart being broken. I just loved Celtic and I loved
Evan's nodding away there. He wrote a full article on that feeling.
4th of August, 77.
Yeah, exactly. And, and it showed the following season. Celtic finished 5th. Rangers won the treble. Now, my old man, and he's a great kind of sounding board. He said that he didn't believe in the premise that one man carried a team, but it was felt so much when Dalglish left. That's how important he was. That's how much of a fulcrum he was to Celtic. And also, it was kind of the kind of start of the slide in Celtic's runs to the latter stages in Europe. From about 67 to 74, Celtic were always in the last 8 or beyond. And then they got to the quarter-final against Real Madrid in 80. That's about the only one in recent times that they've reached and they've reached the last 16 in the Champions League under Gordon Strachan a couple of times. But, they were serial last 4 finals, quarter-finals for about just short of a decade, 60s and 70s. And I think when Dalglish left, there was that kind of, those days might be gone now, because I think they felt that if Dalglish stayed, they would still maybe have a chance to get to latter stage of European competition. But Dalglish was a pivotal player and showed it. First season he left Celtic, he wins the European Cup, scores a winner at Wembley. Brilliant goal against Bruges in the final. And, he achieved his dream. But I think a lot of Celtic supporters wanted him to achieve that at Celtic and saw it as a missed opportunity because he potentially could have, Kevin. I was only young at that time, but that's how good a player Dalglish was.
Yeah, I remember I was up the Campsie Hills with a friend of mine when it came over in Radio Clyde that he'd left us August 4th, 1977. And I think Celtic at that time were playing in a pre-season tournament in Australia, of all places, which included Red Star Belgrade. But Dalglish hadn't made the trip, and that's when we all get that sinking feeling in our hearts that he was off-ski. I suppose one thing to note is that when he left us at 26 or 27. So, if we were able to get some of our current stars, if we knew that the likes of Hatate, Matt O'Reilly, Abada, Kyogo, well, Kyogo is about 27. If these players were giving us up until 27, we'd be delighted with it these days.
Yeah, true.
And Dalglish gave us, Dalglish was scoring goals from 1970. He gave us 7 very good years. Yeah. I remember he announced his presence in 2 League Cup games against Rangers in 1971, I think, both of which had to be played at Ibrox because Celtic Park was undergoing redevelopment. So this, what age would he have been? About 17, 18, maybe 18. He's basically handed the ball to take a penalty kick at Ibrox in this League Cup game, and he just, there's footage of it. He just slots it, absolutely no nervousness, no tension whatsoever. The other thing I remember about Dalglish is that in all those years, he never once won the Football Writers' Player of the Year.
Wow.
Between 70, you've got I mean, okay, you can't argue with some of these. Between 70 and 77 when he left, you had like Pat Stanton, Martin Buchan, Davy Smith at Rangers, very fine left half, George Conley. And then in 1974, Celtic had won the Scottish League and Cup double, had got to the semi-finals of the European Cup, who were put out in penalties by Inter Milan, and they gave it to the Scottish International World Cup squad. On 1975, Sandy Jardine, 1976, John Gregg for the second time. But in those years when Dalglish was like probably the most gifted and high-performing player in Scottish football, not a sniff at the Football Writers Award. So he gave great service to Liverpool, but they were playing on, that was the beginning of the first legendary Liverpool team where they won the European Cup in 77, 78, 81 and 84. So obviously he's playing in a far higher stage, but the 6-7 years that he gave us, he was magnificent. He was our first truly pin-up player.
Yeah.
Got a comment here, Tony, saying David Ferguson, King Kenny leaving was worse than Elvis dying. Same year, of course, same year.
I've said before, and you can disagree with us, Kenny Dalglish is the last world-class player in the true definition of world-class this country's ever produced. Anybody wants to name another one, go for it, but I'm talking about genuine definition and meaning of the word world-class. Kenny Dalglish is the last world-class player this country produced. You can argue about great players and very good players, but Kenny Dalglish for me, world-class.
I would say Callum McGregor's getting to that now. Given his performance the other night and also that goal for Scotland against Croatia, when we were still drawing one each until that wee sod Luka Modric just decided he was
Speaking of world class.
Yeah. Got a couple of comments in about world class there. Paul McStay, Red Scotland says, would you argue that, Tony? Could you argue that point?
I think Paul McStay was an excellent footballer, but I think world class is a stretch for Paul, and I love Paul McStay because he was my era growing up. I just think Dalglish was something extra special. Kevin will back that up. He really wasn't.
This next one, still staying on the topic of world class, but it leads us on to my next question, which is people that have played since 2002 that merit a mention, would merit consideration. Yeah. And this, I think Kevin would nod in agreement with me for this, because he waxed lyrical about him not long ago in an article. Retro Celtic, would you agree that Celtic never had a world-class goalkeeper until Artur Boruc? Now, Artur Boruc would be my contention, and that's a spoiler alert for later on when we've got to pick a five-man bench. He is my goalkeeper for it. You know what I'm like about him, Tony. I know his peak maybe never lasted as long as some other keepers, but I think he reached a height that other keepers simply haven't reached in Scottish football, while with Celtic, which is the crucial part.
Yeah, I think
I'm actually going to put this down just now, just so we can.
I think every Celtic supporter has an affection for Artur Boruc, because I think Kevin nailed it in his article. He just seemed like, a normal guy that was put in between the sticks, wasn't he? And he just loved it. He loved a pint, and he loved probably loved a gamble as well, and just he just loved playing football, and he loved playing for Celtic. And another one who came across, had no affinity to Celtic, and just got it. He just grasped the nettle so early, and every time he went out, he wanted to please and he wanted to do something. He was clearly a big personality, but he was a bloody good goalkeeper. You know what I mean? You say to yourself, "Wow, where did this guy come from? He's excellent." And Celtic were it's been their Achilles heel. They never won the UEFA Cup final because they didn't really have a goalkeeper of fine standing. And had they had a goalkeeper in between the sticks, they would have won the UEFA Cup final 2003.
Yeah, I agree.
It seems so stupid, doesn't it? Or so simple, I mean. But you need a good goalkeeper in between the sticks, and Artur Boruc was that. I'll throw in Fraser Forster as well. I've got an affinity with Fraser Forster because I think two performances in particular. Fraser Forster, the Barcelona performance, he was superhuman, and then in that 2019 League Cup final, he psyched the whole Rangers team out. And also, I went to see Fraser Forster at Wembley. First time I'd been sent to Wembley when he made his debut for England against Chile. They lost 2-0. on a Friday night, but it was the first time I'd been to Wembley to cover a game, and it was to go down and see him. And when he came into the mix zone after it, it just meant the world to him. It didn't matter that they lost. It was just the epitome of everything that a football player wants to do, play for their country. And he was just so chuffed. And I just remember looking at him and thinking, that's what football's about. He was so happy. So I would throw in Big Fraser as well he got that nickname, didn't he, for that performance against Barcelona, La Gran Muralla, the big wall. Special players do special things, and Boric, I think, was a special goalkeeper too. I'm not denying your shout, Sean. I think, it's a toss-up for me between those two, but I'm erring to Fraser Foster just because of
Is there anybody? I mean, there's been mention of Pat Bonner in there as well. Obviously, he was before 2002, obviously, but is there anybody else from post 2002 that you think merits a mention? For instance, somebody put in here saying Kaiser put in saying KT Kieran Tierney. I would say no. I would say that he's not even the best left back from Wishaw in that team, but because Tommy Gemmell's there already, but. Nonetheless, reached a level, I suppose. You know where I stand on Emilio Ezagiri, Tony. Yeah. Similar way Artur Boric reaching a certain level, I think Emilio Ezagiri reached a level in that 2010-2011 season that Kieran Tierney didn't reach at Celtic, but that's perhaps controversial.
Lots of comments coming in for Lubo, and I think you'll agree that when Larsson and Lubo, I think we had two players at that particular time who gave the Celtic supporters unbridled joy. I mean, Lubo, a gift from God. That moniker kind of says it all, doesn't it? And he came late in the day, and everybody looked at this footballer, brought by Joseph Englos, of course, and everybody looked at this footballer and thought, wow. And they thought the same thing. We wish we'd have got this guy 10 years earlier, as Kevin says, in their 20s, when they were maybe at their peak. But Moravchik kind of reached a late peak as well at Celtic.
No, I remember him. Lots of love for Lubo here.
I remember him playing against Juventus in 2001 when he beat them 4-3. And I mean, I can't be entirely sure of this, but I'm sure I read a comment. Who was the Juventus manager then? Was it Lippi?
It would be Marcello Lippi, yeah.
And one or two of the Juventus players kind of saying, where has this guy been? How come we don't know about him? Because he joined Celtic when he was 30.
Yeah.
But he's a legend at St Etienne.
Yeah.
He played for several years. And, I think there's a video that exists that you can pick up on YouTube, quite a kind of long video of an awful lot of his goals, which includes some, belters from St Etienne. So, he's operating with a good team in a top 5 league for several years. And he's also playing for an international team, which during that period were probably amongst the top 5 in Europe, if not the world. So those who kind of knew something about him, who had seen him before he joined Celtic, would not have been surprised that he hit the ground running. I think his birth, his big welcome was when we beat Rangers 5-1, and he scored a couple, including a header from around the penalty spot. And I remember, I think it was a game against Hearts at Parkhead, where the ball kind of like comes out of the night sky at a fair rate of knots, and he traps it with his bum.
Because he could.
Well, some people would have called it showboating, but I think with him, he thought, this is the most effective part of my anatomy, given the rate and speed of this ball, for me to have the best chance of bringing it under control, right? And then he just delivers a cross into the penalty area within 2 seconds. So yeah, he did give us a lot of joy, and you could almost argue that Martin O'Neill maybe was he still there when Strachan took over? No, you could argue that Martin O'Neill was maybe a little bit hasty in sort of dispensing with him or moving him to the periphery of the first team squad, because again, it was those 2 goals against Rangers at Ibrox, the 3-0 game.
Yeah.
So I mean, almost every game he played, you knew that he was going to produce something special for you.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to think on players who played, as I say, post 2002. Some love for Nakamura in here.
Aye, Naka.
Plenty of there's actually quite a few names. I would hazard that. It depends of your selection criteria, I suppose, but for no other reason than I think he needs to get a mention. Scott Brown.
Yeah.
Obviously, maybe not on the level of actual talent, although I would argue he gets underrated in that aspect. But as a focal point of the most dominant team since the Lions, I think he deserves at least a mention. Anybody else that takes your fancy, Tony?
Highly decorated player, Scott Brown.
Yep.
Captain, leader, legend. Says it all, really, doesn't it? So, and you can argue the toss about his merits as a technically gifted footballer, but for years he was the heartbeat of that Celtic team, and he drove them to success after success after success, and took on all comers. Yeah, I guess.
Virgil van Dijk, any having that?
Virgil van Dijk, but also the recently, the recently departed. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. That makes it sound as if one more. Tom Rogic. He gave me. He had this. I thought he was in terms of natural ability. Rogic was the closest to Moravcik. You know what he could do with a football, his vision. You could look back in his career and look at kind of maybe significant injuries. And it was probably only in the last year that we were ever confident that he would give us, consistently 90 minutes. But what a player and what a touch! No. He would have been. When I was, watching Celtic versus Real Madrid the other night, and looking at Modric and looking at some of the Real Madrid players who had instant control and who could move the ball any direction at any rate. And I thought if Rogic was playing for Real Madrid, he would fit in with that. He had that touch and that vision.
Got a few bits of love for pre-2002 players again. Tony, Davy Hay getting a mention, Roy Aitken getting a mention, players of that ilk. We've not mentioned one name, which again I might give you a wee spoiler. It might very well be on my bench, but a certain Tommy Burns, Tony.
Yeah, I think Tommy Burns has an affinity with the Celtic supporters just because he was a die-hard Celtic supporter himself. And I mean, Tommy Burns had ability,
over 500 games, over 80 goals. Yeah, I suppose I kind of take what you're kind of hinting at there, that potentially on just ability wouldn't be in that kind of team. But there's an argument to be made that he could be christened the greatest ever Celtic man, therefore a spot in the greatest ever Celtic team not beyond him, no?
It just depends on your personal rationale for these things. If you're saying it's the greatest ever, then I think the clue's in the name, isn't it? The greatest ever. You're talking about talent, aren't you? And we're not disrespecting anybody because it's all subjective, isn't it? Your 11's going to differ from Kevin's, to my own. But we are not arguing with the 11 that's chosen. The 11 that are chosen
is the 11.
Is the 11, and they're not up for question. And just because I said McStay wasn't world class, I'm not dissing Paul McStay.
Well, you did cause a wee bit of a kerfuffle in the comments, Tony, I think. But
I was asked a question about my definition of world class, so I gave you my definition of world class. I said Dalglish was world class, but I'm not. Paul McStay was an excellent footballer, brilliant Celtic footballer, wonderful Celtic footballer, and he's in that 11 on merit, and I wouldn't take him out. So that's not up for question.
One of my criteria for a great, even if you're not saying world class, but somebody who can be considered great for your team, is how often they produced game-changing moments, and to what extent did they have that in their toolkit, that in adversity or you're up against it or in a very close game, does he have it within him when on form to change the course of the game in your team's favour with a piece of magic, an unlikely goal. And one of my favourite players, I know this might cause a bit of division, and he should have been with us for a lot longer, but I loved him to bits, was Charlie Nicholas.
Mine too. Early Charlie Nick.
Because when Charlie Nicholas broke into the first team, he was probably the first Celtic hero I had who I could totally identify with, because he was my age at the time, and he cut about Glasgow's. He was part of Glasgow's Demi Monde. He was in the top nightclubs. He didn't wear socks with shoes. He'd a wee earring, and he was gallus. He had a bit of pizzazz, and he could make things happen. And people questioned his pace because he wasn't the quickest, but they used to say that about Dalglish as well. But his close control in and about the box could take out 2 or 3 defenders, in one turn, and he was a top class finisher. And I've just got this. I've always had this residual fondness for Charlie, even though we only get 3 years out of him or so.
Tony's right on board with that, by the looks.
I mean, his goal against Ajax in the Amsterdam.
Unbelievable.
The old Ajax was just class, and Celtic put that brilliant Ajax team out. And if you just saw the home leg when they finished 2 each, watch it, you'll YouTube it, and just marvel at Soren Lerby's goal when Cruyff parts the Celtic defence, and it's a wayward pass from Jesper Olsen, and honestly, this cushion volley, and Lerby dinks it over Bonaparte, and then Celtic go and beat them over there, and Charlie Nick scores one of the best Celtic away goals. But early Charlie Nick, again, when Dalglish left, my heart was broke. Then Charlie Nick came along, and I just always remember Archie McPherson used to go wild when the commentary box whatever. Oh, it was a great goal! That kind of stuff.
Give us that again, Tony.
If you YouTube that footage, Archie's just like every time Charlie gets the ball, he knows something's going to happen. And just the inflection in his voice, and it's just brilliant, right? I love all that, and yeah. I'm with Kevin on that. Early, I mean, Celtic went to, Kevin will remember this, they went to Wembley Arena and they won the
Danny Craney.
I mean, they took on Kevin Keegan's Southampton and an Ipswich team, and they absolutely destroyed them.
Well, in that, the Daily Express 5-a-sides were quite a big thing.
Aye, and Sports Night used to show it on the telly, so
because all the top professional teams in England took it really seriously. It was a big PR. It was very prestigious.
Mm-hmm.
And the BBC loved it. It got massive audiences. But Celtic would always be invited, because of who they were. But Celtic always used it to almost like to give a wee sort of Brucey bonus for some of their promising young players.
Yeah.
And they would eventually kind of go out to a team of seasoned pros from the likes of Spurs or Wolves or Newcastle. But I remember that the 1981, and it got quite a lot of coverage in the papers at the time because with the exception, I think Willie Garner was the overage, was the only kind of experienced player. They must have given it to Willie. Just I go down and look after the kids and make sure that they get into their beds and they're not kind of out misbehaving in London. But they skated that competition and their football, they're natural, because of course it's five a side, right? So to win, it's going to favour nimble football players. And these guys, they played it as if it was something up the pitch,
And they were street footballers, that's why they won it. They were street footballers playing with their pals. Basically, Kevin.
There was a bit of swagger and a bit of gallus, But can I throw in a name which might be controversial? Neil Lennon.
Okay, for the couple of people have mentioned Neil Lennon. To be
fair, again, Neil Lennon, I thought was always underappreciated for what he did. I thought, he wasn't at the glamour end of the team. He didn't score many goals. There was a kind of perception that he was maybe a bit chunky. He didn't move too well. He wasn't a brilliant passer. But I remember going to Tynecastle and watching him I think it was an early kick-off Scottish Cup tie. So I'm up in, I mean, you know what Tynecastle's like. I love Tynecastle because it's a proper football arena. So I'm in one of the kind of the top rows. So you get this panoramic vision, you know, unblemished vision of the entire park. And you can see everything in detail. And I began to realise that Lennon, you know, for people who said that, you know, he wasn't like the most fit player they'd ever seen, he covered every area. Any time a Celtic player was hemmed in by opponents in some corner, Lennon's the one-man cavalry offering an outlet, saying, I'm here to assist you, I'm here to recycle the ball. And in that game at Tynecastle, I saw him do it at one corner, and then like a couple of minutes later, he's up at the other corner doing the same thing. And if you look at a lot of the goals from that era, Lennon might not be the final assistant of the goal. He might not have played the kind of initial, you know, the final killer pass, but he's more often than not in the build-up. He's made the perceptive forward pass that has kind of led to the move that's led to the goal. I thought he was a phenomenal player for us.
I'm going to throw in Paul Lambert.
As well.
And a phenomenal footballer for Celtic, Paul Lambert. And also, I'm going to throw in John Collins.
Yep, somebody mentioned him as well. The left-sided
wonderfully gifted footballer, and alongside McStay, those two guys were just the two right men in your midfield at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. They didn't have players of a certain calibre around them, and the two of them kind of carried Celtic on their back for a good few years in the 90s against a rampant Rangers who were just strolling over the top of them at that time. But and that's why I mean, Paul McStay, as I've said, a wonderfully gifted footballer too, but John Collins was a tremendous player. But just two guys who I wished had played in a different era, because they would have been ridiculously successful. Because they were.
Have we mentioned for? Sorry, Kevin, on you go.
John Collins and his Predator boots.
Yes, his Predator boots. Yes, and as you said, I said to score once at Ibrox with a free kick might have been jammy. To do it twice was showboating. Top corner, bottom corner. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Gabby mentioned for Brian McClare, get Big Yogi getting a mention, George Connolly. Plenty of people getting mentioned here. There is literally too many to go through, Tony. But,
Paul Elliott. Paul Elliott was a cracking defender, but again, another one who I thought was the right player at the wrong time at the club. But he did make a difference. And a wee spoiler alert coming up for maybe somebody in my defensive bench, but I loved Mark Rieper. I thought Mark Rieper was absolute class. Mm-hmm. And if you're talking about somebody who came in and made a difference, Celtic arguably, I think, would not have won or stopped 10 in a row had Mark Rieper not come into that defence.
I would agree with that.
He was class, and it was just a shame what happened to him with his toe injury that forced him out the game, because I think the big man could have.
He was a great signing.
A real terrific Celtic player, but for that season alone, he just oozed class, and he felt, for the first time in a long time, he felt rock solid at the back with Rieper and Stubbs there, and he made Stubbs a player, or he made Stubbs a better player. Stubbs even admitted that. Rieper was great, I thought.
Would you have Lee Griffiths in or around?
No, I think, don't get me wrong, I think it was phenomenal when he hit top form, but with the amount of attacking kind of players that you can pick from Celtic, I don't think so. What do you think, Tony?
I don't know, but of the kind of modern era in terms of strikers, someone's just beat me to it. Kaiser, I loved Moussa Dembélé. Dembélé turned up every Rangers game, and
cup games, by the way, Tony, because that Hampden record that they had, he was still the top scorer.
But my favourite moment, and I think I've mentioned this in the pod before, wasn't a Moussa Dembélé goal. It was a pass that he gave to Edouard in the day they went to Ibrox and won 3-2 with 10 men.
That's right.
Rodgers threw
Edouard.
He threw Edouard on to win the game, and then in a flash, it was a 3-man move. Can't remember who played the ball to Dembélé, but I mean, just talk about talent and vision and knowing you're a player. And he has whipped it, a brilliant ball to Edouard, who's did what he did. He jinked inside and then curled into the top corner. And it was just that for me marks you out as a special footballer. And he loved a goal against Rangers. But actually, you're talking about like game-defining moments and stepping up.
Yeah.
And Rogers threw Edouard on because he knew he might only get one chance to win the game. And he's combined with his fellow compatriot and they've won that game. And it was one of the more memorable matches at Ibrox for a lot of Celtic supporters. And so Moussa, I think, just because he was a big game player, turned up, and another one who grasped the nettle very early and realised what it was to play for the club and gave his all and, did some game-changing things. And I would give him a mention.
Fair enough. So that's all what we're here to do. I mean, there was I'll come on to the last wee challenge that we've set ourselves in a minute. There were other awards given out that day 20 years ago when they named the greatest ever 11. There was the greatest ever player, which obviously went to Jimmy Johnston. The greatest ever Celt went to Jock Stein. The greatest ever captain, naturally, was Billy McNeil. The greatest ever foreign player, Henrik Larsson. Now, the best ever Derby goal, Tony, went to Murdo McLeod's goal in the 4-2 game in 1979, which is otherwise known as, you wrote about, 10 men won the league. And cheers, that's Boney M in my head again.
That was it.
Yeah, that gets further out every time you talk to somebody. It'll be in a halfway line soon enough. But yeah, Kevin, you were there. So my dad says it's the best Celtic Rangers game ever. You will never eclipse or top that.
That was my first game against Rangers. So it was, I think from memory, it was the 22nd of May 1979. So at the start of 79, for the first 3 months, there'd been a very, very harsh winter. And when Celtic started playing again in March, like they had a backlog of 5 or 6. And we hadn't been that convincing up until Christmas. Nobody was really, very few of us thought that they would win the league because Rangers had a good team then. And he just kept scraping wins and suddenly, it was on. So my dad had got 2 tickets for him and a pal. He still wasn't comfortable with it taking me to Celtic Rangers games. So of course the first game gets cancelled. But unknown to him, I'd got the tickets. I knew he'd forget about them, and I just kind of didn't mention them. And then of course the game takes on greater significance as we count down to May, because suddenly Celtic are cutting the gap, and suddenly it's looking like effectively a league decider. And like the demand for tickets was 10 times what it had been for the original fixture. This was like probably the first proper league decider against Rangers for a long, long time. My dad can't remember what he's done with the tickets. He's forgotten he had them. I think he just thought he'd got it. And I said, well, look, I might be able to get us 2. But see, if we do, you need to take me to the game. And then produced 2 tickets he already had, and he had to take me. So that was my first game. But I thought the best goal I've seen a Celtic player score against Rangers was Chris Sutton to win the green and whitewash.
Green and whitewash, yeah.
Again, Celtic had long had the league tied up in 2004, but nobody had done the 4 out of 4. Although in that season it was 5 out of 5 because we beat Rangers in the cup. And 2 minutes ago, it wasn't a good game of football, and everybody was just settling for the 0-0 and thinking, well, all right, we'll sell him a drink because we won the title. So the goal was celebrated, and the quality of the goal was celebrated as if it was like the middle of a tough fought campaign, because it got us the green and whitewash, and it was just such a magnificent goal. The chip, the vision, the fact that he'd made it by the wee flick towards Larsson and then getting it back again, shrugging off the board and then chipping it from 20 yards.
I think a lot of people...
That was a top-class Rangers team, That was a really good Rangers team.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people will also pick out Henrik's in the 6-2 game.
Yeah.
I mean,
that had happened when this was voted, so that must have been considered. But obviously, it was a year after it.
Yeah,
so
2
years after it. So it was.
I agree with Kevin
after it, if you know what I mean. It's obviously taken on another level entirely and different things. But the last award that they gave out that day was greatest ever Derby game. which went to the 7-1 League Cup final in 57. It's just hard to argue against, is it? But
I told that great story on the sad passing of Bertie Auld, when Bertie had played in every round up until the final, and he was dropped for the final. And I don't even, if memory serves, I don't think he went to the game or whatever. I don't know if he took huff or whatever, but seemingly he was broken the news by a journalist, and the journalist said to him, "Did you hear the score?" And Bertie said no, and he said it was 7-1. And Bertie said, "That's a tragedy, son, but it's a marvellous tragedy." And don't know if it's apocryphal, but it's certainly attributed to Bertie. And, how can you argue with winning a League Cup final? And if memory serves, Kevin, I think that's still a British record score in a cup final, is that?
Yeah,
is that right?
yeah. And also they had an uncommonly early kickoff time for some reason, and the crowd wasn't what you would normally have expected for a Celtic Rangers Cup final. And I think it was in the 50s, 60s, at a time when Celtic Rangers games were, comfortably in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
But the 4-2, I would say that, given the significance of the result, I would say the 4-2 game eclipsed the 7-1 game. Okay, we're in love with the scoreline, but it was a League Cup final. And we'd won the League Cup the previous year against Partick Thistle. So, the League Cup, even then, it was only 10 years gone. It wasn't felt to be that important, not as important as it is now. So I'd go for the 4-2 game, just because decider, what it signified, and the fact that we only had 10 men.
I've got two regrets in my life, Kevin. First one being that my father never took me to the 4-2 game, unlike yours, and I regret it for days. And then obviously not seeing Celtic win the UEFA Cup in 2003, but it's probably, but the first one really rankles with me. But I was only 79, so I would be 6 years of age. I can understand.
I couldn't get the UEFA Cup final in 2003 because I was the deputy editor of the Herald at the time, and I had a ticket, but because that was going to be a massive news operation for us, not just a sports operation. This was like a page 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the front of the book. Win, lose, or draw, and I just felt like I couldn't morally justify like departing my lofty post to join the Ville, it was a regret, because I don't really think MD noticed whether I did or not.
Tony, Kevin, our last kind of topic for the last wee segment is arguably the hardest one, I think, because I says to Tony, "Were you fretting over this?" He says, "Not really," but I was up past midnight thinking, right, how do I get the right balance between acknowledging people from the past and acknowledging the recent kind of dominance, and what's the right kind of mix? So the last kind of challenge that we've set ourselves. Now, I must say that, I'll put it back up, that team, as I said at the start, was picked in a rather kind of unsettling 3-3-4 formation. So initially, I was going to say, right, we need to pick an 11 using the current team's formation, and that would mean 4-3-3, so you need to have one forward dropped and a defender added. But instead, because I really don't want it to come across crass or disrespectful, the 11 is the 11. We will not reselecting 11. So that's as it is. And instead, what I've set the challenge is that we're to pick a 5-man bench out of all the players that we mentioned, and even some that we might not have mentioned, some that were in the comments. We pick a 5-man bench so that, it was obviously be Jock Stein managing this team, so he's got another few players that he can throw on to keep that intensity up. So the only rule I set was that it couldn't just be like 5 other strikers, 4 other midfield, whatever. It has to be 1 keeper, 1 defender, 1 midfielder, and 1 forward at least. So basically, you can have 2 of one of those positions. And I'll go first. I've already said this is who mine is going to be for goalkeeper. If we can come to a consensus, great. If we can't, fair enough. My goalkeeper's Artur Boric.
Me too.
All right, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, Tony. It doesn't matter what you say.
No cast and vote here. I would have threw in Fraser Foster, but Artur Boric, I have no argument with. Yeah, no problem.
Artur Boric it is then. No disagreements there. Out of curiosity, what position did you go with 2 for? I went to
forwards.
I went 2 midfielders.
Right, fair enough.
No, I went 2 strikers.
Aye.
All right. We'll go to Tony. You first for your defence or the defender that you've picked.
I mentioned him earlier. I just thought Rieper was brilliant.
Rieper, okay.
Mark Rieper. I just thought he was sensational. And to win, basically that was the. I've said it before. The title of all titles, to stop Rangers from winning the 10. It doesn't come any more pressurised in Celtic's history than that. And history could have taken a whole different chapter and turn if Rangers had won the 10. And I just thought he was a vital cog in that machine. That's my rationale. And I also thought he was a class footballer too. I mean, I know we've mentioned the likes of Van Dijk and people like that, but I love Van Dijk too. But I think Van Dijk showed more of his quality after he'd left Celtic with Southampton and obviously now with Liverpool. I just thought Van Dijk kind of strolled it up here a wee bit, and the fact that maybe Rangers weren't around, and he was a phenomenally gifted footballer, but I just think Rieper performed to a level that Celtic needed that season, in particular, and it's a historical season in more ways than one. So I would, my shout would be Rieper, but I will leave that in your capable hands if you can.
I don't think there will be a consensus here because I've went kind of left field. Kevin, we'll go for yours first. Your defender that you picked.
Well, again, to make this a team for the generations, and also as a salute to my dad and the men and women of his generation, who are now who've now gone and departed. The man that they always talked about when I was young was Bobby Evans, 54 caps for Scotland, which was a record for years and years, and captain of the team that won the League and Cup double in 1954, the first, the only one that we did in 25 years, 47 to, and also I remember Billy Connolly.
Yes.
There's a little bit of footage of Billy Connolly talking about Bobby Evans, because he said that when he was a lad, he would go along to the games, and he said there was always one bloke with the loudest voice in Parkhead who at the same time during every game would just shout Bobby Evans for like an hour, a minute, and he said there were ships in the Clyde that were crashing into each other with this voice shouting Bobby Evans. So I'm going for Bobby Evans.
I suspected that's who you might go for. So there's no consensus with this one, because like you, Kevin, I kind of wanted to. My whole thing with this bench is trying to get a nod to as much of the club as possible. So I've went with like someone who I don't want to say time has maybe started to forget, but almost it is that in a way. I went with Alec McNair, and still the oldest player to feature for Celtic. Obviously not somebody that I've seen, obviously, but someone that I've always kind of enjoyed reading about, Celtic Almanac, stuff like that. Versatile, key to the club's first 6 in a row. Still, as I say, still the oldest player to feature for Celtic, but it's more of I like to give a nod to some players that from generations that maybe wouldn't be otherwise considered and stuff. So there's no consensus there. Tony, you willing to concede to Bobby Evans? Because I will if you want.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. I mean, the other one I would also, if you're going to nod to players of the past, my father swears that John Clark was a wonderful defender, and Big Billy needed him around during the heyday of 67.
Massively plays his own ability down, Tony, as you found out when you interviewed him at the anniversary of the Lions.
A wonderful man and just a really humble guy, but I'm assured by my father that he was a fantastic defender. So I would certainly give a nod to John Clark. Those of an older persuasion will be able to come in the comments and tell me about John Clark's prowess as a defender. But as I say, I go with my dad. He's my go-to guy, and so I'll give a nod to him. But because I personally saw Mark Rieper. But yeah, Bobby Evans, and I remember Billy Connolly talking about that, Kevin. That was funny. The Bobby Evans shout, tremendous. But I'll yeah.
We'll go with Evans for the consensus.
Go with Evans with the
consensus.
Pez
mentioned Sonny Jim Young as well. You've got obviously Dan Doyle, players that blazed their trail away back. Midfield, Kevin, we'll go to you first for midfield. Is it just one or is it two? Or you say you picked two strikers, wasn't it? So who's your midfielder?
Lubo.
Lubo, okay.
Is Lubo more a midfielder than a?
Yeah, he's a midfielder. Aye, he's a midfielder. Aye.
Yeah, Lubo, for the reasons stated, just like we'll always remember him with the utmost affection, and especially I was in the Broomloan stand that day in 2001. We hadn't beaten Rangers at Ibrox for a few years, and although the league was already won, like it, if Celtic had been beaten by Rangers, they would say, well, this was just a one-off. We're still the top dogs in Scottish football. And the two goals he scored were just sublime and characteristic of him, especially the one where he's heading down the inside left channel with two defenders breathing down his neck. And I think it was Kloss coming out, big man coming out to meet him. And he stopped stone dead. The strength he must have had in his lower leg to go at that rate and then stop stone dead and wave cheerio to his pursuers, and then just to dink it over the Rangers goalkeeper who's coming out in my rate of knots will stay with me for the rest of my life.
Right, Tony, who's your midfield? Or midfielder, I should say.
I think there's a consensus here because mine was Lubo as well.
Yours Lubo too, is it?
Yeah, okay. It was, yeah. Right.
Looks like Lubo's getting in now. I picked two midfielders. And it kind of goes back. And again, a lot of this depends on how you define great, because if it's most talented, then neither of these two gets in. But for me, great doesn't just mean your talent. It means your contribution to the club, contribution to the team, and everything else like that. And as I say, we're picking Alec McNair in defence. It was kind of in recognition of his importance to a particular era. So with that in mind, Scott Brown was one of my midfielders as a nod to the club's kind of unprecedented domestic dominance, and I think that deserves to be reflected. The other midfielder I picked, and again, kind of referenced this earlier on, the other midfielder I picked was Tommy Burns for the 500 appearances, 80 odd goals is still some going, even if you would argue he was never the most talented. But for everything else that he embodies as well, I've gave him a nod. But we've got the consensus with Lubo there, so.
Tommy Burns, you say, he's not the most talented. The thing that probably counted against Tommy was that he didn't have great pace. But his left foot was a wand. He was a beautifully poised, elegant footballer. But I can see why you're giving him a nod.
To go to the strikers, you've both picked two, so I'll get it out of the way and go first with my one. And I suspect if you have picked two, then surely there's a consensus with this guy, Jimmy McGrory. Yeah. Tony, did you pick him?
I didn't actually, no.
You didn't? Oh, well, no. I've picked Jimmy McGrory, obviously more goals in games, an all-timer in the scoring stakes, not just for Celtic, Tony, but football-wide, I would argue.
Yeah,
so,
well, the retro Celtics just came in there with a comment.
With both of them?
With both of them, that's the two I picked.
Right, okay. You say it before I put it up, and I'll not let retro Celtic nick your
Charlie Nicholas and George Cadet.
Okay.
Right. Now, we spoke earlier about LAH's Charlie, and I did the Archie thing as well, so there you go. But George Cadet, for me, would have ran riot in Scotland had he stayed with Celtic. This was a phenomenal goal scorer, and it's a real shame that deal never went through. And I think if it did, we would be talking about Tommy Burns as a manager in a different light. Because I think George Cadet would have been
the I can see the logic. Yeah, I can see the logic.
Goal-scoring fulcrum of that team, because George Cadet to me was a predator, and he was one of the best, arguably the best natural goal scorers that I've seen in the flesh in a long, long time. And he star shone brightly at Celtic, but too short. And I just think that Cadet would have been an absolute superstar. And it's just more's the pity that deal never got across the line. As I say, yes. And history has changed and altered on certain events, and I think that was one of them. Had Cadet signed, I think you would be talking about Tom in a different light as a manager as well, Sean. But he didn't. But I thought he was a wonderfully gifted and talented footballer.
So Kevin, one of your strikers, Jimmy McGrory, yep.
Yeah, definitely. He just has to be in. What is it, 550 goals?
I mean, as I say, an old-timer in football, not just in Celtic.
And he only got 7 caps.
Yep.
Make of that what you will. There's a great story about Jimmy McGrory that the Celtic board, as was their wont, had made a deal in advance with Arsenal. In the 30s, Arsenal were the best team in English football in the 30s, won 5 titles, 2 FA Cups. And so Willie Maley takes him to Lourdes because he's a very devout man, Jimmy McGrory, but he's already arranged to meet Herbert Chapman, the Arsenal manager, and thinks that McGrory will be kind of quite impressed that Chapman is at Lourdes, and said, well, it's a done deal. You're going to get loads more money. You know, they're the greatest team in the UK. And McGrory was heartbroken that they could even think that he'd want to leave Celtic. And he I think he broke down and said, no, I'm not leaving. And allegedly he was punished by, like, I think he got his wages docked, or he certainly didn't get what he should have got because he deprived Celtic. So Jimmy McGrory, and heart ruling head, because it would be between Charlie Nicholas and Chris Sutton, but I'm going with Charlie Nicholas for, like, I mean,
callousness,
and takes me back to my student days following Celtic, all the shenanigans that came with it.
Or as my father would call it, your plucky youth.
Yes.
So we got a consensus there, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm pretty sure you get every one of your players picked.
I will concede Jimmy McGrory. Of course I will. There's no.
Well, I mean, because the two of you both picked 2 strikers, it will be 2 strikers rather than 2 midfielders. And you both picked Nicholas, and me and Kevin have both picked McGrory. So Kevin's got his way again here. Kevin's ended up getting his keeper, his defender, his midfielder, and his 2 strikers.
Right. That's manipulation.
we're bowing to age here, aren't we? Age, wisdom, and knowledge. I think we're bowing to here. You know, so yeah, indeed.
Tony, you get anything else to add to the commenters? There's plenty of comments in. Enjoyed them all.
No, I've loved this. This has been a brilliant episode. It's there's no right or wrong here. It's just opinion, isn't it? I know.
I'm pretty sure there'll be some people saying there's wrong, but
that's fair enough. I mean, I don't think that anybody who throws in a suggestion, it's not wrong. It's their thoughts, and they're perfectly entitled to them. They see football and support Celtic in different ways and see the merits and strengths of other players. So yeah, I mean, it's just a brilliant debate, isn't it? But that team there is sacrosanct. That's the greatest ever Celtic 11. They're untouchables, and you know, and I always talk about the Danny McGrain. Kevin talks about Billy Connolly. There's a great story where Billy Connolly was putting his greatest ever Celtic 11 in the Celtic View, and it had, you know, right back Danny McGrain, and it just had the rationale was Daniel Fergus in brackets, no surname required. And I thought that's brilliant. Known the world over, you know. I mean, everybody knows who Daniel Fergus is. Yeah, correct. You know, and you're just like, what? That's great. You know? Everyone else had like a chunky paragraph on their abilities. Daniel Fergus, no surname required. You're just like, great. And I still, maybe it's just me, but I still say when I'm going into town from East Kilbride station, I'm going on the Daniel Fergus. People just look at me, you know, with the Daniel Fergus McGrain. Come on now, you know. So
I'm using that.
Honestly, every time I'm on the train, it's always I'm on a Daniel Fergus. I've seen it to people on mobile phones, and they just look at me as if, what's he talking about? But yeah,
right, there is our consensus subs bench, which could just be called the Kevin McKenna subs bench, but there we go. Artur Boruc, Bobby Evans, Lubo Moravcik, Charlie Nicholas, Jimmy McGrory. Charlie Nicholas's inclusion is causing a wee bit of a stir, I must admit, but the way that you two were talking about him earlier, you've won me over, I would say.
Charlie,
but it is all subjective.
The first spell of Charlie Nicholas, if you were around for that, it was mesmerising. So, yeah, but there you go. It's, as I say, it's all subjective, isn't it? It's all about opinions and experiences. Sam Hartley's just said there. So, yeah.
We've had more than a few comments saying that we should be doing this on the regular, going through the decades. So, Kevin, that's you. You've been trapped.
That's me. I will say that the team that Ange is building now will it will give us 2 or 3 in future kind of teams, all-time greats teams. Because that is the most.
Callum McGregor on his current trajectory will be mentioned.
That because we've now got 2. People talk about a reserve 11. Celtic have effectively got 2 first teams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's disrespectful to say that the second 11 that don't get a game are reserves, MD's reserves, and I can't remember that ever happening at any other time in Celtic's history.
Yeah, I just think, as you say, Kevin, I think lots of Celtic supporters are just enjoying watching this team and the style of football that they're playing, that swashbuckling attacking style. And actually, you know, even the other night, losing to Real Madrid, but, you know, going for it, you know, there's ways to lose 3-0. You know, Sean said it wasn't a 3-0 game. It was, if that finishes 2-1 or 3-1, you know, it's...
We created more. We created more clear-cut chances in that game against Real Madrid than Liverpool did in last season's European Cup final against them.
Yeah, so that, I mean, and there is levels, and that's the level that you're aspiring to. But when you see it up close and personal, and then you kind of see the first 50 minutes, you think maybe it's not as unobtainable as you think. If this manager can stay and the core of players can stay, and that's you know, you look, you never say never about winning the Champions League, but you know the odds are heavily stacked against you and not in your favour. But you know, you just, as the manager says, he wants to make Celtic a force in Europe again. And if we can all stay around, and you know, he gets that back in, and his ambition is, you know, quenched in Scotland, then you can see Celtic possibly.
So no Brighton move then, Tony? No move to the Seagulls then?
Nah, why would you move to Brighton?
That's exactly what Chris Sutton says, to be fair. Why would they downgrade like that? But
as I've said before, he's in the construction business, Sean, not deconstruction.
Couldn't agree more.
You know, so I think there's ambition boxes he wants to tick with Celtic, and and I think he trusts his own ability. To be able to do that more than anything. He said he was determined, and he said it was his job to make this club a force in Europe again. So yeah, we're all with him. We all hope, and we all see that we believe in him as well, that we think he can do it. So
get plenty of nice comments saying this was a good show. Just something a wee bit different we thought we'd do, since it was 20 years to the day since the club announced that greatest 11 and the greatest awards and stuff at the, I was going to say the Hydro wasn't there, it must have been the SECC with it. So we thought we'll get Kevin on, talk a wee bit about it.
Been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us, Kevin.
Kevin, we'll get you on again.
Aye, no bother.
If you're up for it, because really enjoyed that. It's just great to get different people's perspective, and
it's always good to talk about the Celtic.
That's Celtic, exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Retro Celtic saying today's the longest podcast you've had. Loved it. Good to know you don't get sick of us after half an hour. That's good. Falconhoff saying Celtic Decades is a cracking idea.
That is a great idea, to be fair.
We'll look into that. Why not? Do you know what I mean? But I suppose before we go, Tony, one last plug for the website, and that I was going to say that Leila Bada top up was last week's prize, the signed top, wasn't it?
Yeah, the signed top. On to football prizes, £3.16, Sean. That's it, isn't
for
it?
Today, yep.
We entered into the draw. Links in the description. Football prizes are our new sponsor. We thank them. You can win a signed Celtic home shirt, signed by the full squad, and also we need to pick a comment of the day to enter
Oh,
them
so we
into
do,
that
aye.
draw for free, Sean.
There was plenty.
There's too many, wasn't there?
If I could pick yours for the Archie McPherson impression, I would pick that. But actually, I never put this up earlier on. This isn't my comment of the day because he won it recently. But this was somebody trying to get on my good side, Kevin. Greg Taylor's not far off that greatest 11, Sean. There was plenty. Any that sticks in your head, Tony?
I've got to be honest. I just thought all the comments were class. To be honest, because it's their own opinions, isn't it? So it's very hard to isolate a comment from all of that. But
well, I suggest potentially this one for the very, 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 very start when you gave Kevin a quite brilliant introduction. Gary McDowell says, Tony, have you got a part-time job as a boxing ring announcer, Tony?
No, I don't, but yeah. Okay, we'll go with that, actually. We'll go with that, because he's not the first one, because I think someone also put a comment about Guillaume Balaguer's introduction as well. The other day,
of course, yeah.
So why not? Go with that. Thank you, Gary. That's
right, Gary, email or direct message, one of us or the Celtic Way account on Twitter or Facebook. We'll get you sorted with a free entry into that squad signed top.
And you know what to
Jerry
do,
Coyle,
guys.
quickly, where we comment, Tony, Sean, why don't you just do the Livy preview after all of this? Tune in tomorrow, Jerry, because that's when we'll be doing it.
And just along the bottom, guys, the start, you know what I'm saying. Subscribe to the Celtic Way. £1 for 2 months of full access. Everything on the website and the YouTube videos as well. You join us, hit that button. Join us at www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. That's been a pleasure, gentlemen. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you for having me on.
Cheers, Tony.
Anytime.
Cheers for your comments, guys.
Cheers. Care. Thank you.
Bye.